All right, so welcome to our hopefully not too long TMUX Firetalk. I ended up spending a little more time on it than I meant to. So, uh, some old guy and a potato are going to tell you about TMUX. Okay, so what is TMUX? It is a terminal multiplexer which enables a number, but you don't care about the technical definition. You can read the man page on your own time. Um, this is what it lets you do, so that's probably what you care about. Um, Why would I use TMUX? Do you ever want to look at more than one thing at a time in your Linux shell? Well, that would be a reason to. Ever need to show someone what you're doing, collaborate on a box at the same time? You can use TMUX for that. You ever been connected to a remote thing and you're running a task that runs for a long time, but you don't know if your SSH connection is going to die and you want to run it in the background and come back to it later? You should probably use TMUX. Also, it makes you look super cool because you got like 12 windows and you're switching back and forth, so you can look like elite hacksaw. Highly recommend. So, before we get into any of the actual like functionality, you're going to need to know what a prefix is because every single TMUX command that I know of, when you're invoking it with a keyboard shortcut, involves the prefix followed by the actual command's like command character. So the prefix is by default Control B. So you do Control B, and you'll wait like a microsecond, and then you'll press the command. So, for example, I believe I have the one for splitting the pane vertically. You would go Control B, wait a second, and then percent. Not Control B percent. Control B, wait percent. Okay, got it. Good. You can follow along at home if you have TMUX installed. It takes a couple seconds to get used to that. It took me a few seconds, but once you do, it's pretty muscle memory. Okay, so we're gonna get into panes first. Panes are probably the thing you're gonna use the most. They're pretty simple, and they're probably the main reason that I started using it. You're gonna use the prefix followed by the double quote to split it this way, cross, so that you have a top section and a bottom section. And to split it the other way, you're gonna do prefix followed by percent. I put shift plus in case, or shift and the quote, just in case that's less confusing. In all the rest of the slides, it's just going to be the one character if it's a combo of like shift and a character. Same with shift 5%.
And I believe you can continue to nest it inside each other. I don't think it's not suggested, but you can do that.
Yeah, you can nest as deeply as you want. As you can tell, it gets a little cluttered if you go too small. So there are ways to improve that by opening up certain windows that we'll get into later, but you can nest as deeply as you want. And of course, I know our ops lead, Kyle, loves to use TMUX, and he has a very large and high resolution monitor so that he can have more TMUX panes open at a time. It's a pretty big brain strat. All right, so switching between panes, once you've made a pane, it's kind of dumb if you can only just like make a pane and then not be able to go back to the one you were just on. So you do the prefix and then an arrow key. That lets you switch back and forth. Pretty simple. Then you might want some to be bigger than the other. You might want your text editor to have more space so you have more room to look at your code and you don't actually need to look at the output as much. So you can resize in pretty much any direction. Notice the plus here. You're doing this while holding the prefix. So immediately after, there's no like pause, Control B, and then the arrow key right away. Don't wait. Otherwise, you'll just switch back and forth. This is probably one of the things I find most annoying. I do this quite often instead of switching panes. It's a little bit of an annoyance, but it is a very convenient thing to be able to do. Pane numbers. This one's something I don't use very often, but if you want to go to a specific pane without using the arrow keys and all that, you can do the prefix followed by Q, which will show the number, and then while the numbers are up there, you can press a number on your keyboard, and it'll switch to that pane for you. Pretty simple, pretty easy, pretty quick, but I usually don't use it. I usually just use the arrow keys. So what if I want to focus on a thing? You see in the bottom left, the getEnt password file or command has some output that I can't really read because it's in such a tiny little box. I want to make it bigger so I can look at it. So I can do the prefix, Control B by default, and Z. And that will expand to make the pane fill the whole window. In order to undo this, you also do prefix Z. It's pretty simple, very useful. Now, another thing that you might run into is you might have some command output that's like way up off your screen now, and you don't know how to go back because you like scroll, and then the TMUX window goes off your screen, and you're like, that's not what I meant to do. So if you want to look back up through your stuff, you can do prefix left bracket. For you British people, I don't know what you call it. You call it something else. You're weird. But left bracket. Q is the important command you will need to exit this mode in case you actually want to do something again in your shell. But then you can navigate this with, I usually use the arrow keys. I've been told by different cheat sheets and such that you can use KJHL, sort of like in Vim. However, I have never done that, and it usually doesn't work when I try to, so grain of salt there. So that mode's actually called copy mode, and I didn't figure this out until like a year after I started using TMUX. But you actually can copy things in that mode. Fun fact. So this is done, you highlight with control space, use your arrow keys to get the highlight selection, then you can copy with control W, exit, that will exit the copy mode. You could then do the prefix followed by the right bracket, and that will paste it into another TMUX pane or wherever. So if you ever need to like copy paste something in the TMUX panes, very easy to do. Don't have to worry about the whole keyboard shortcuts and control C, control V maybe not working in different shells. Just use this. Now we get into sessions. So sessions is basically like a persistent instance of your TMUX in a session. So that will associate, you can see windows and all of the panes that you have open. This can be detached from, to come back to later, and attached to. You will attach to it by, on the command line, saying TMUX attach -T and then the name of your session. It's very useful for a lot of reasons. We can see later, it lets you collaborate. But it also lets you put things in the background, come back to them later, and open up many other. If you want to see all the sessions that you have open, you can do prefix S in TMUX. And as you can see sort of in the little demo on the side, TMUX ls will list all of the current sessions. These are persistent until they are deleted. They are stored in the /temp folder. So if your box deletes everything in temp on boot, you will lose all of your TMUX sessions on boot. So keep that in mind. If you have a server that like never gets turned off, this probably won't be an issue, but if you're doing this on like a personal box, it might cause a problem. Naming sessions. I think we got one more slide until we switch over to Emmanuel, something like that. Sometimes you don't want your session to just be a number, because that's kind of useless. Like you saw on the previous slide, there's like 15 sessions over here, and I don't know what session 14 is, I don't know what session 15 is, but I do know what session IRSec is for. So you might want to name your TMUX sessions so that you can know which one it is when you want to come back to it later. This is especially useful if you have a lot of them. This is done by, when you're creating it, by saying TMUX new -S and then the name. You can usually create a TMUX session with just TMUX, but that doesn't give you a fancy name. So if you want to rename a session that doesn't have a name, you can then do prefix followed by the $, and then you can change the name. It'll pop up at the bottom, and that will be the easy way to do that. That way you can attach and actually know what you're doing, know what you're attaching to.
Okay, now we want to share our TMUX session. So if you want to like work with someone and you don't have some easy way to do it is when the person you have a TMUX session started and the person can SSH into that box and they can just attach, which is TMUX attach, and that would attach to the, if it's only one TMUX session available, it's going to attach to that one. But if you need to attach to like another number, you can also do the -T, right? The -T and the number, and it's going to be like this, and the dot around it is just based on the resolution of the person who connects to that TMUX session, which I believe you can resize, but I never tried it, so I don't know if you can.
Be considerate when you're attaching to your friends' TMUX sessions. They might get really grumpy with you when you make their very nice layout a tiny little square.
Yep. Okay, Windows. You like using panes? I like using Windows. So to create a window, you just use the prefix and C, and at the bottom it just increases like 0, 1, 2, 3, as much as you want. And you can do the prefix P to go back to the previous one. So if you're like in 0 and you go to 3, you can just bounce around. And the prefix N, same thing. Instead of going backwards, you go to the next one. Prefix X is gonna just close that the window. So if you don't want to just exit out of it like one by one, you can just prefix X and well, it's gonna ask you if you really want to close it. Then voila, you're gone. Commands. Ah, this is really good. I think. No, I don't know this one.
Okay. So most of the things that we've talked about are keyboard shortcuts. However, pretty much all of these can also be done by writing out a command. This is entered basically the same way you do in like Vim. You follow the prefix, and then you press colon, and then you can type. I use detach because until I learned about the prefix D to detach your session, I don't think I ever detached in a different way. So I do the prefix colon detach to detach from my sessions. Basically everything we've talked about you can do this way. It's good to know in case, I mean, you're not going to get there if you don't know the prefix, but it's good to know just in case you want to do something very specific.
Yep. And again, the cool part about TMUX is you can have it running as long as you want. So if you have, but for instance, you need to spin up a web server that's like a Python web server, and you don't want it to shut down every time you exit the shell, you can just start a TMUX, run your server, and just detach from that session, and it's still going to be running behind the scenes, like behind, and it should always be running except the box is rebooted. So I believe in this part, we see there's a web server running, obviously, and these are the logs, well, not now, but the long lines were the logs of the server, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not much you can say more about that.
We're just tailing a log file. We leave, we go back, we're still tailing the log file in the TMUX session.
Yep.
Pretty straightforward.
And there is, if you need to know, if there's a lot of commands, and if you are not sure, you can always do the prefix question mark, and it gives you all the available default, I believe, default configurations for TMUX, and you can just, again, you can do the Control B left brackets, and you can just scroll down to read all of it.
I haven't tested, I was running this on a default configuration for TMUX, so I haven't tested if this will like update when you update your preferences using like a config. I assume it would. I would assume this is just a current list of all of the mappings in for the program. Speaking of configurations,
Yeah.
you can also it's a Linux program that's a utility. Of course, you can configure it. You can make it look however you want. You can change colors. You can change the prefix. You can add different commands that don't rely on the prefix. One of the things that I really appreciate, I stole my configuration from Micah, and he has a set of commands in the configuration file, so that I don't have to do Control B, wait a second, arrow to change my panes. I can just do Alt and then arrow immediately without the prefix, and I can switch back and forth much easier that way. You can also turn on mouse, so like you can click instead of like control doing all the arrow key and keyboard stuff if that's your fancy. You can use that to resize windows as well. It's really convenient. Would recommend adding that to your own personal config. And you can change the colors. I personally like blue a little bit more than green, so that's what I do.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot more. Like you can change the position of the panes and the windows. Like Dan says, it's panic, but no one we just don't know how to use that much, so we can't say use it. You can make a pane a window and a window a pane. Again, there's so much we have not really reading. It's impossible to have all of it in this short time. And also, you can search in the copy mode. So I wouldn't say it's like Vim, but I would not say that's the same thing. But again, there's so much more you can do with this. And also, I believe TMUX accepts plugins. So if you remember my talk from last week, the using modules/plugins as a red teamer sounds like an interesting project. So I mean, yeah,
Maybe coming to a blue team box your way soon.
maybe. Okay, that's it.
If you want more resources, man page, there's like 40 default prefixes and whatever, or not prefix, default commands listed like right there. We didn't go through all of them because that would take literally forever. But there's also some really good cheat sheets. A lot of the information we pulled was from there for this talk, and some tutorials. That was just one that I looked at when I was making this talk. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of people who use TMUX, and they'll tell you that it's better than Screen because kind of is. Fight me, Josh. Yeah. Any questions? I don't see any on. I haven't.
5.
Angry.
Ah.
Yeah. 4 or fish.